Rancher won the lottery thinking he'd get rich, but the Apache widow on the land beneath him, he had never expected life to change in a single afternoon. For most people in town, the rancher was just another quiet man working the land. He woke before sunrise, drank black coffee while standing on the porch, and watched the sky slowly turn from dark blue to pale orange. The ranch had been in his care for years, though it had never truly felt like success. The soil was dry, the fences were old, and every season brought new problems. Some years it was drought. Other years it was sick cattle or broken equipment. He didn't complain much. People knew him as steady and dependable, a man who spoke only when necessary. He lived alone after losing his family long ago, and work had become his way of staying strong. The mornings were always the same. He checked the water tanks, counted the cattle, repaired what needed fixing. Dust followed him everywhere, settling into his boots and clothing like a permanent companion. He rarely visited town unless he needed supplies. The ranch was both his burden and his home. Money had always been tight. Some months he barely covered expenses. There were days when he wondered if he should sell everything and leave, but he couldn't imagine living anywhere else. The land held memories, some good, some painful, but it felt honest. One hot afternoon, he drove into town to buy feed and spare parts for a broken gate. The streets were quiet except for a few locals sitting outside the diner. Everyone knew everyone here, and conversations were slow and familiar. He parked his dusty truck near the general store and walked inside. The air conditioning hummed softly, offering relief from the heat. While waiting in line, he noticed a small stack of lottery tickets near the counter. He usually ignored things like that. Luck had never been part of his life, but the cashier joked that the jackpot was huge this time, enough to change anyone's future. He hesitated. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was exhaustion from years of struggle, or maybe he simply wanted to feel different for a moment. He bought one ticket, that was all. He folded it carefully and slipped it into his wallet, then returned to the ranch without thinking much about it again. Days passed as usual. He forgot about the ticket until the evening news mentioned the winning numbers. He sat at the kitchen table eating quietly when he remembered. The ticket was still in his wallet. He checked the numbers slowly, one by one. At first, he thought he had made a mistake. His hands trembled slightly as he looked again. Every number matched. For a long time, he just sat there, staring at the paper as if it might disappear. He had won. The realization felt unreal. The small kitchen seemed too ordinary for such news. Outside, the wind moved gently across the dry fields, unchanged by his sudden fortune. The next morning, he confirmed it officially. The amount was more money than he had ever imagined. Enough to pay debts, repair everything, maybe even start over somewhere new. Word spread quickly through town. Strangers congratulated him. People who barely spoke before now greeted him warmly. The diner owner refused to let him pay for breakfast. Old acquaintances stopped by to talk about business ideas. At first, he felt uncomfortable with the attention, but slowly, excitement grew inside him. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to dream. He imagined fixing the ranch completely, new fences, better equipment, healthier livestock. He imagined expanding, buying more land, turning the struggling property into something powerful and lasting. He wanted to build something meaningful, something that would prove all those years of hard work were not wasted. Financial advisors began calling. Real estate agents sent letters suggesting opportunities. Some ideas sounded too risky, but one proposal caught his attention. There was land nearby, large, open, and mostly untouched. People said it had hidden value, maybe natural resources beneath the soil. Investors believed it could become extremely profitable. The rancher visited the area. Standing there, he felt possibility. The land stretched wide beneath the sky, quiet and strong. It felt like a chance to grow beyond survival and finally succeed. The seller explained that the property had a complicated history, but assured him everything was legal and ready for transfer. Papers were shown, contracts prepared. Lawyers discussed details in fast voices that sometimes confused him. He trusted the process. After all, he had hired professionals to guide him. As days passed, he convinced himself this was the right decision. The lottery had given him opportunity, and he didn't want to waste it by doing nothing. He signed the purchase agreement. Construction plans began almost immediately. Workers arrived with trucks and equipment. Dust rose into the air as new paths were cleared. The rancher watched with pride, believing he was building a future far bigger than anything he had known before. Town residents talked about his ambition. Some admired him, others whispered that he was moving too fast, but he ignored doubt. For once, he felt ahead of life instead of chasing behind it. Still, small details started to appear that he didn't fully understand. One afternoon, a local historian mentioned that parts of the land had old cultural significance. Another person said previous owners had struggled with legal claims connected to an Apache family. The rancher asked his lawyer, who reassured him that everything had been checked. The documents showed clear ownership. He decided not to worry. Weeks passed. The land changed as machinery reshaped the terrain. Workers uncovered old stones and markers, though most assumed they were natural or unimportant. At night, he sat on his porch and imagined the future. He thought about building additional barns, maybe hiring more people, creating something lasting that others would remember. He felt proud, but also restless. Winning the lottery had changed how people treated him. Some friendships felt less genuine. Conversations often turned toward money. He missed the quiet simplicity of before, though he never admitted it aloud. One evening, as the sun lowered across the horizon, he noticed someone standing near the edge of the property. It was a woman. She stood still, watching the activity from a distance. Her posture was calm, neither aggressive nor afraid. The rancher assumed she was curious about the construction, but something about her presence felt different. She did not wave or call out. She simply observed. He returned to his work, thinking she would leave. But the next day she returned, and the day after that. Workers began asking who she was, but no one knew. She never interfered, never crossed onto active areas without permission, but her quiet attention made people uneasy. The rancher felt a strange curiosity. He sensed that her presence was not random. One afternoon, he finally walked toward her. As he approached, she greeted him respectfully. Her voice was calm, steady, and clear. She introduced herself as an Apache widow whose family had deep history connected to the land. The rancher listened politely, but felt confused. He explained that he had purchased the property legally and had no intention of causing problems. She nodded, acknowledging his words, but said something that stayed in his mind long after their conversation ended. She told him that ownership on paper does not always mean understanding what lies beneath. He didn't know how to respond. At that moment, he still believed everything would work out easily. He thought money and legal contracts would solve any issue. But as he walked back toward the ranch house, he felt an unfamiliar weight settle in his chest, a quiet feeling that perhaps the story of this land had only just begun. The next morning, the rancher woke earlier than usual. The sky was still pale and quiet, but his thoughts were already busy. He kept remembering the woman standing near the edge of the land, her calm voice, and the way she spoke about ownership and history. He told himself not to worry. People often claimed things when money was involved. He believed the legal process had been clear and the documents he signed were official. Still, something about her confidence stayed in his mind. He finished his coffee and walked outside. Workers had already started arriving. Trucks moved slowly across the dirt, carrying equipment and supplies. Dust rose into the air as machines continued preparing the land for future projects. The rancher watched for a moment, feeling proud again. He had turned a simple lottery win into a growing opportunity. This was progress, this was success. But then he noticed her again. She stood near a large rock formation at the far side of the property. She was not close enough to disturb anyone, yet she was clearly watching. The rancher felt a mix of irritation and curiosity. He walked toward her slowly, unsure of what he wanted to say. When he reached her, she greeted him politely, just as she had before. She introduced herself again, this time giving her full name. She explained that her husband had passed away years earlier and that she now represented her family's connection to the land. Her voice remained calm and respectful. She did not accuse or argue. Instead, she asked if they could talk. The rancher agreed, though he felt defensive inside. She showed him old papers, worn documents protected inside a folder. Some were copies of agreements from decades earlier. Others were photographs and maps marked with handwritten notes. She explained that her husband's family had ancestral rights connected to parts of the land, especially the areas beneath the surface. She said that long before modern ranches existed, her people had lived and traveled through this valley. The rancher listened carefully but struggled to understand how this affected him. He had purchased the property through official channels. He had trusted lawyers and real estate experts. He told her that he had no intention of disrespecting anyone's history, but that the land legally belonged to him now. She nodded slowly, as if she expected that response. Then she said something that made him pause. She told him she was not there to fight or threaten him. She only wanted him to know that the land held meaning beyond profit. Some areas were connected to burial grounds and sacred traditions. The rancher felt uncomfortable. He had never thought about the land in that way. For him, it had always been about work, cattle, fences, survival. He promised to look into her concerns and speak with his lawyer again. She thanked him politely and left without pushing further. The conversation stayed with him throughout the day. He tried to focus on work, but his mind kept returning to her words. Later that week, construction crews uncovered unusual stones arranged in patterns. At first, workers assumed they were natural formations, but one employee mentioned they looked deliberate, almost like markers. The rancher decided to pause work in that specific area until he understood more. He did not want unnecessary problems. He called his lawyer, explaining what the woman had said. The lawyer reassured him that everything was legal but agreed to review the documents again just to be safe. Days passed with growing tension. Workers felt uncertain. Some locals began whispering that the land had always been complicated. The woman returned several times, always standing quietly at the edge of the property. She never interfered or raised her voice. Instead, she waited patiently, as if she believed time would reveal the truth. One afternoon, the rancher invited her to sit on the porch and talk more openly. He offered her water, and they sat facing the wide landscape stretching toward the mountains. She spoke about her late husband, describing him as a man deeply connected to the land. She explained how he had taught her that every place carries memory, not just stories, but emotions left behind by generations. The rancher listened quietly. He found himself unexpectedly interested in her stories. She described traditions of respecting the earth, taking only what was needed and honoring the past. She did not speak with anger. Instead, her tone felt peaceful and certain. The rancher admitted that he had never thought about land that way. To him, land was something you worked to survive. She smiled gently and said both perspectives could exist, but balance was important. Their conversations slowly shifted from disagreement to curiosity. He began asking questions about her life, and she asked about his ranch and his journey. Despite their differences, he noticed a strange sense of understanding growing between them. Still, legal matters remained unresolved. The lawyer called back with new information. Some older agreements suggested shared rights related to certain parts of the land. The details were unclear, and more research would be needed. The rancher felt frustration rising inside him. He had trusted professionals and believed everything was settled. Now uncertainty threatened his plans. He walked through the property alone that evening, thinking about the future he had imagined. The lottery win had felt like freedom, but now it felt complicated. He wondered if he had rushed into decisions too quickly. The next day, workers discovered another area that required investigation. Construction slowed again. Costs continued rising. Town residents started offering opinions. Some encouraged him to fight legally and protect his investment. Others advised patience and respect for history. He felt caught between two worlds, one focused on profit and progress, the other focused on memory and meaning. The woman continued visiting, never pushing him but always present. One evening, as the sun set in warm colors across the valley, she stood beside him watching the horizon. She told him that conflict did not always need to end in loss for someone. Sometimes understanding created solutions neither side expected. He did not respond immediately, but her words felt important. For the first time, he considered that this situation might not be about winning or losing. It might be about learning something he had never known before. The days that followed felt heavier than before. The rancher woke each morning with a sense that something important was slowly changing, though he could not yet explain what it was. Work continued, but everything moved more slowly now. Machines paused more often, workers waited for instructions, and lawyers sent messages asking for more time. The land that once looked like opportunity now felt like a puzzle. He spent more time walking across the property alone, thinking about everything that had happened since the lottery win. Only weeks earlier, he had felt unstoppable. Now, uncertainty followed him like a shadow. The Apache widow continued visiting regularly. She never arrived with anger or demands. Instead, she walked quietly, sometimes stopping to look at the mountains or the trees as if remembering something important. One afternoon, the rancher saw her standing near a dry riverbed. He walked toward her, unsure why he felt drawn to speak again. She greeted him calmly and asked if the investigations had revealed anything new. He explained that the lawyers had discovered old agreements that were more complicated than expected. Some documents suggested that certain rights beneath the land had never been fully transferred when previous sales happened. He admitted that he didn't fully understand the details. She listened without interrupting. Then she told him something that stayed in his mind long after their conversation ended. She said that sometimes people believe they are buying land, but in truth, they are stepping into stories that began long before them. The rancher felt a quiet discomfort. He had always believed that legal papers settled everything. Now he wondered if reality was more layered than he had thought. Over the next week, legal teams visited the ranch. They walked across the property, taking notes and photographs. Experts studied areas where construction had uncovered unusual stones and markers. Work slowed even more. The rancher received a call from one of his financial advisors. The advisor spoke quickly, warning him that delays were costing money and suggesting that he should push forward with strong legal action to secure full control. The rancher listened, but did not immediately agree. He felt tired of aggressive solutions. Later that evening, he sat on the porch, watching the sunset turn the sky into soft colors. The Apache widow arrived quietly and stood nearby. They spoke casually at first, discussing weather and small details. Then she began telling stories about her husband. She described how he had walked the land every morning, greeting it as if it were alive. He believed that every place had a spirit shaped by those who cared for it. The rancher listened carefully. He had never heard anyone describe land that way. For him, land had always been something to manage and survive on, not something to greet. She told him about specific places on the property, areas where ceremonies had once been held, locations where her ancestors had gathered. She spoke with respect, never demanding that he accept her perspective, only sharing what the land meant to her. As she talked, the rancher began seeing the landscape differently. He noticed how certain trees grew in patterns, how rocks formed shapes that felt intentional. He realized he had never truly looked at the land beyond its usefulness. Days later, the lawyer returned with more detailed findings. The legal history showed gaps and unresolved agreements that connected to indigenous mineral rights and cultural protections. The rancher felt frustration rising again. He had invested large amounts of money based on promises that everything was clear. He felt betrayed by the agents who had convinced him to buy. That night, he walked alone under the stars. The sky felt endless, reminding him of how small his plans might be compared to time itself. He wondered if the lottery win had blinded him. Perhaps he had rushed forward without understanding the deeper layers of what he was stepping into. The next morning, he invited the widow to walk the land with him. They walked slowly, stopping at places she considered important. She pointed out subtle details he had never noticed, old carvings hidden in stone, paths shaped by generations of footsteps. She explained that the land was not only about history, but about responsibility. People who cared for it became part of its story. The rancher found himself asking more questions than before. He wanted to understand why she remained calm despite the uncertainty. She told him that patience had always been part of her life. As they talked, he began seeing her not as an obstacle, but as someone deeply connected to something meaningful. Construction remained paused in certain areas, and workers spent time repairing fences or maintaining equipment instead. Some felt frustrated, but others appreciated the slower pace. One evening, a group of elders from her community visited the ranch. They walked quietly, observing without judgment. The rancher felt nervous at first, but welcomed them respectfully. They spoke with him kindly, explaining their connection to the land and their hope for cooperation rather than conflict. The rancher realized that none of them wanted to take everything from him. They wanted recognition, respect, and protection of specific areas. This understanding changed something inside him. He began questioning the idea that success meant control. Maybe success could also mean partnership. Financial pressure still existed, and doubts returned whenever he reviewed expenses. But he noticed that conversations with the widow brought a strange sense of calm. She never tried to convince him aggressively. Instead, she allowed him to reach conclusions on his own. One afternoon, he admitted to her that he felt lost. He had expected the lottery win to solve problems, not create new ones. She responded gently, saying that sometimes life gives challenges disguised as gifts. Her words stayed with him long after she left. As days turned into weeks, he began seeing how quickly he had changed since winning the lottery. At first, he had imagined building something larger than life. Now he felt more interested in understanding what already existed. He watched the land differently, noticing how animals moved, how wind shaped the grass, how silence carried its own meaning. The truth beneath the surface was not just legal or financial, it was emotional. He realized that money had given him opportunity, but understanding required patience. The rancher began to feel that life was moving in a direction he had never expected. Weeks earlier, he had believed success meant expanding quickly and turning his lottery win into even more money. Now he found himself slowing down, listening more, and thinking deeply about every step he took. Construction remained paused in several areas while legal discussions continued. At first, the delay felt like failure. Every day without progress meant expenses without profit. But slowly, the quiet space created by the pause allowed him to see things differently. He spent more time walking the land instead of managing machines. The mornings felt calmer. The wind moved gently through the grass, and birds crossed the sky in long, silent patterns. Without constant noise from equipment, he noticed small sounds he had ignored before: leaves brushing against each other, distant animal calls, and the steady rhythm of nature continuing regardless of human plans. The Apache widow visited regularly, though never in a way that felt intrusive. Sometimes she walked beside him. Other times she simply stood quietly near the horizon, watching. Their conversations became more personal. He told her about his life before the lottery, about years of struggling to keep the ranch alive. He spoke about loneliness and how work had become his way of staying strong. She listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful and calm. In return, she spoke about her own journey. She described losing her husband and learning to carry responsibilities alone. She told stories about community gatherings, traditions, and lessons passed down from elders. Her words were simple but carried deep meaning. The rancher began to realize that wealth could not replace connection. Despite his sudden fortune, he had often felt more isolated than before. People treated him differently now, and he sometimes missed the days when life was simpler. Legal advisors continued urging him to fight aggressively for complete control of the land. They explained that pushing forward legally could secure his investment and protect future profits. Some even warned that compromise might weaken his position. But each time he considered that path, he remembered the widow's calm presence and the stories she shared. He realized he did not want endless conflict. One evening, they sat together on the porch as the sky turned gold. She asked him what he truly wanted from the future. The question surprised him. He had spent so much time chasing opportunity that he had never paused to ask himself what success actually meant. After a long silence, he admitted that he wanted peace more than anything else. He wanted to feel proud of what he built, not worried or divided. She nodded, understanding. She suggested that perhaps the answer was not choosing between his dreams and her history, but finding a way for both to exist together. The idea stayed with him. Over the next days, he began discussing alternative solutions with his legal team. Instead of trying to remove the claims connected to her family, he explored possibilities for shared agreements. This approach felt unfamiliar and uncertain, but it also felt honest. Meetings were arranged with tribal representatives and community leaders. At first, he felt nervous walking into those conversations. He worried they might see him as an outsider or an enemy, but the meetings surprised him. People spoke respectfully. They shared their concerns openly, but also expressed willingness to find solutions that respected everyone involved. They explained which areas of the land held cultural significance and why protection mattered. The rancher listened carefully. Instead of feeling attacked, he felt invited to understand something larger than himself. He realized that he had always thought of land as ownership, but they spoke of it as relationship. That difference changed how he saw everything. One afternoon, he walked alone through a section of land that had caused the most legal complications. The sun was warm, and the ground felt solid beneath his boots. He imagined what it might have looked like decades or centuries earlier, people walking, gathering, living. He felt a quiet sense of responsibility growing inside him. Later, he met the widow again, and they talked about potential solutions. She explained that her goal was not to stop him from living or working on the land. She simply wanted respect for certain areas and acknowledgement of her family's connection. He realized that cooperation might allow both of them to move forward without losing what mattered most. Slowly, an agreement began taking shape. Certain parts of the land would remain protected. Development would avoid culturally sensitive areas. Educational events could be hosted to share history with visitors and neighbors. The ranch could continue operating in ways that supported sustainability rather than aggressive expansion. When he first imagined success after winning the lottery, he had thought about growth in numbers, more land, more buildings, more profit. Now he thought about growth in understanding. The town reacted with surprise when they heard he was choosing cooperation instead of conflict. Some people questioned his decision, believing he should use his resources to win completely. But he felt certain. He no longer wanted victory that came from pushing others aside. He wanted something lasting. As weeks passed, relationships strengthened. Workers returned to their tasks with renewed purpose. Instead of rushing, they focused on careful work that respected boundaries. The rancher felt lighter, as if a heavy pressure had lifted from his shoulders. One evening, he stood with the widow overlooking the land as the sky turned deep orange. He realized that the lottery had given him money, but this journey had given him something deeper, perspective. He told her that he used to believe wealth meant control. Now he believed wealth meant responsibility. She smiled softly, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable, filled with shared understanding. He began planning new ideas for the ranch, not as a place of quick profit, but as a place where history and future could meet. He imagined visitors learning about the land's story, cattle moving peacefully across open fields, and communities working together instead of standing apart. The future no longer felt like a race. It felt like a path. The ranch felt different now, even though the land itself had not changed. The same hills stood under the wide sky, and the same wind moved through the grass, but something inside the rancher had shifted completely. Months earlier, he had imagined his lottery win as the beginning of a faster, richer life. Now he realized that it had been the beginning of a deeper journey instead. The agreement between him, the Apache widow, and her community was finally completed after many careful discussions. It had taken patience, listening, and trust from everyone involved. Certain areas of the land were now officially protected, recognized not only for their history, but for their meaning to people who had lived there long before him. Other areas remained open for ranching, but with new guidelines focused on balance and respect. The rancher felt a quiet sense of relief when everything was finalized. The uncertainty that had followed him for weeks slowly faded. For the first time since winning the lottery, he slept peacefully without worrying about legal battles or rushed decisions. Work on the ranch began again, but it looked different from before. Instead of loud machines running all day, there was a slower rhythm. Workers paid closer attention to where they stepped and what they built. The rancher encouraged everyone to learn about the land's history so they could understand why certain areas were protected. At first, some workers struggled to adjust. They had expected expansion and fast progress, not careful planning. But over time, many began to appreciate the new approach. The ranch felt more thoughtful, less rushed. The Apache widow visited often, no longer as someone standing at the edge of the property, but as a partner walking beside him. Their conversations became a regular part of daily life. They shared meals on the porch, watched sunsets, and talked about small details as well as big ideas. He found comfort in her calm presence. She never tried to change him forcefully, but her way of seeing the world influenced him deeply. He started noticing beauty in simple moments, the sound of horses moving through dust, the way sunlight touched the mountains in the morning, the quiet laughter shared during conversations. The town slowly accepted the changes too. At first, some people questioned his decision to cooperate instead of fighting for complete control. They believed he could have gained more financially by pushing harder. But as time passed, they saw something different. Visitors began coming to learn about the land's history and culture. Events were organized where people could listen to stories, share food, and understand each other better. The ranch became a place where different worlds met peacefully. This surprised many people. They had expected conflict, but instead they witnessed cooperation. The rancher felt proud, though not in the loud way he once imagined. His pride was quiet, steady, and rooted in the feeling that he had made the right choice. One evening, as he walked across the fields, he remembered the moment he had first checked the lottery ticket. Back then, he believed wealth meant escaping struggle. Now he understood that struggle had taught him lessons he needed. Money had opened a door, but people had shown him the path beyond it. Financially, he had not become richer in the way he expected. Some investments had failed, and delays had cost him more than he planned. But the ranch remained stable, and its new direction brought unexpected opportunities. Local schools began arranging visits so students could learn about history and nature. Artists and writers found inspiration in the land's story. Neighbors who had rarely visited before started coming to events, curious about the changes. The rancher noticed how these moments created something more valuable than profit. They built connection. One afternoon, he and the widow walked together along a ridge overlooking the valley. She told him that her husband would have respected the way he chose understanding over conflict. Hearing that filled him with a quiet sense of honor. He admitted that he had almost chosen a different path. If he had followed the advice of some advisors, he might have fought endlessly in court. The land might have become a place of tension instead of cooperation. She reminded him that every decision shapes the future, not only for ourselves but for others. The rancher realized that his journey had been less about land ownership and more about personal growth. He had started as someone focused on control and expansion. Now he felt more like a caretaker, someone responsible for preserving something meaningful. As seasons changed, the ranch grew stronger in its own way. The cattle thrived, visitors respected the boundaries set for protected areas, and the community around him felt more connected. Sometimes he still thought about the man he had been before the lottery win, tired, struggling, unsure of the future. He felt compassion for that version of himself. Without those years of hardship, he might never have understood the value of patience and respect. One evening, during a gathering on the ranch, he watched people from different backgrounds sharing stories around a small fire. Laughter mixed with quiet conversations. The sky above them stretched endlessly, filled with stars. He felt something settle inside him, a sense of belonging he had never felt before. The widow stood nearby, smiling as she watched the gathering. Their eyes met, and he felt grateful for the unexpected path that had brought them together. Winning the lottery had once felt like the greatest moment of his life. But now he understood that the real victory came from the choices he made afterward. He had learned that wealth is not measured only in money. It is measured in understanding, in relationships, and in the ability to grow beyond old beliefs. As the night grew deeper and people slowly left the gathering, he remained outside for a while, listening to the wind move across the land. He felt at peace. The ranch was no longer just a place of work or investment. It had become a living story, one shaped by respect, patience, and shared purpose.